Hey there, how's it going? Today we'll be talking about aggressive criminal, something that I've been preaching about with the rotation of Jackson. I mentioned that criminal will rise to the top because with their multitude of HQ pressure, there's no way for the corp to rid agendas from their hand back into their R&D, and thus criminals will shine. They can steal lots of agendas early with the right amount of pressure. The question is, how do you build such a criminal deck? We'll explore that today, but first, let's talk about how such a criminal deck should play. In the early game, the criminal should be sieging HQ early and often, using the criminal techniques, your sneak door, your legwork, even going to the extent of single runs like inside job and spearfishing on HQ, just to get those accesses, because chances are, HQ is loaded. This should, in theory, grab you about 4 or 5 agenda points early, 2 or 3 agendas, and that is basically a winning move. Because all you have to do after that, once you get to match point, you sit back, you relax, set up your breakers, set up your money, and then push into the centrals for one final Hail Mary. So that's the plan. What ID would be most appropriate for this? I've laid a couple of the more powerful ones out for you. What do you think? Ken Tenma has 17 influence, and that could be crucial, seeing as criminals lack some very powerful features in faction. Los and Gabe both give you big money, but they're both niche in their users. Gabe shines very, Gabe does very well against low ice decks such as CI and Acid Spam, whereas Los fares better against Glacier decks that run 16 or 17 ice in the deck. Leela Patel is all around strong. Her ability basically slows the corp down to the point where it extends your early game and thus the amount of time you have to get those HQ runs in. Take your pick. All of them are equally weak. Why do I say that? When you start building your deck, you realize you need a backbone of a draw engine, and that's where criminals start sputtering. Without their trusty draw cards, what do they have? Career Fair into Earthrise is usually the option for criminals, but this isn't very reliable. Earthrise as your only draw card isn't going to get you far, and not to mention that it's completely crippled by the likes of Scarcity. What about event-based draw engines? Well, you can go for the build script process automation Deuce's Wild Suite, but it's both deck slot consuming and very influence consuming. You have very little room left to play around with influence, giving you very few tricks to close out the late game, and this is a big problem. So I really don't like doing either of these methods, so I found another criminal ID that allows us to expand our horizons. Can you think of what it is? It's Omar. Omar's a criminal, right? Right? I mean, it looks blue, I guess. It also has Sneak Doors text printed on it, so it must be criminal. Surely. Yeah, basically what I realized is that it is easier to import your criminal aggressive HQ cards into another faction than to play criminal itself. Just play 3 copies of Legwork and Career Fair each, because Career Fair enables a lot of good resources, and then round out your influence suite and your restricted list card with Employee Strike. E-Strike is such a good all-around card now. It pains me to have to use it from the restricted list because there's so many much more interesting cards out there. But you want a good deck, E-Strike's the way to go. So, that's our influence. Now, all of you are definitely asking by this point, why am I playing fake blue? The reason is, you can include some orange cards that are really powerful to this strategy, and I'm going to take you on a tour of them right now. We start off with the fact that, again, this is blasphemous, but Anarchs have superior economy to criminals. Criminals don't have Desperado, criminals don't have Account Siphon. They do have security testing, but that is pretty lame, because once they ice up the centrals, your security testing does nothing. Liberator Account, on the other hand, is reliable money, it's guaranteed money, it's very strong, and it's in the Anarch faction. They have superior card draw. I'd much rather play the I've Had Worse Inject Earthrise suite over any criminal draw engine any day. This is the biggest reason why you want to play Anarch. But wait, there are even bigger than biggest reasons out there. What else do we have? Anarchs have the superior breakers. With criminals generally, you have to assemble all 3 breakers. You have to install them from hand, paying the expensive install costs before you can reliably get past ice. Anarchs can run willy-nilly as long as they have, a couple of these breakers in their bin. They don't have to worry about program trashing because they're all in the bin. They're relatively cheap to install and they don't cost a click to install. That might be just the biggest reason here. Spending clicks and credits to install breakers that you might not even use is not good. This removes tempo that you should be using to assault centrals instead. This click saving from the Anarch faction is another big reason why you want to play Anarch over Criminal. Their breakers are just better for getting you in once or twice. Perhaps the Criminal breaker suite is better in the long term because MK Ultra and Black Orchestra is seriously terrible, but when we are talking about landing 1 or 2 key legworks, these are the breakers you want. It's like the Anarch SMC. What else? Yes, more pressure. This is very clear. Anarchs have much better pressure cards than Criminal once you have the legwork done and dealt with. Criminals really don't have much other than D-Res, which is not what we're really going for here. We want multi-access, we want disruption. More and Bagat give you exactly that. And here is the single biggest reason why you want to play Anarch. It is a resource, it costs 3 credits, and it's no longer on the most wanted list. Yep, the degenerate DDoS. Oh man, this is the best legwork enabler. And it synergizes so very well with Omar. With it, no corp is safe until they have 2 eyes on every central. Most corps will only place 1 eyes on HQ for most of the early game, and once you find your DDoS legwork, you can go to town on HQ and steal all those agendas that you are looking for. So here's the deck. This is an aggressive Omar deck, make no mistake. This guy has no place in the late game. By the time you get to the late game, Omar is all old and frail. He will just die of old age. We do not want that. We want to win speedy. We want to win within Omar's lifetime. And how do you do it? You run. You run. You run on every single Anice Central. Anice Archives, go for it. Omar run to HQ. Omar run to R&D. R&D Anice, get single accesses to R&D, trash the stuff, run again, steal the agendas. And of course, if they make the biggest mistake, leaving HQ open, man, those legworks are gonna rain. They don't see that coming. This is a full-on aggressive deck. Make no mistake, this is pure Criminal. Let's get into the game. Huh. Asset spam Gagarin, huh? Not just any old asset spam, 49 card spam. This should be interesting. Okay, so when you're up against asset spam as an aggro HQ deck, you gotta remember that there are some cards, some assets that are must trashes. We are not wizards, so we can't control their board. But there are some assets that need to go in the bin. One-Poor Reclamation is the biggest serial offender by far. If they get a One-Poor trigger off, all the agendas are going back to the bottom of R&D. You will never see them again. That's a problem. If you want a counter to that, a hard counter to that, you can play Showing Off, but that's a story for another day. The other big card, problematic card is this one we see here, Daily Business Show. Same as One-Poor. If they draw an agenda in the 2 cards from DBS, it goes to the bottom of the deck, never to see the light of day again. No go. Alright? So, my opponent ices up HQ and Archives, which indicates to me that they do have at least 1 agenda in hand. Also, it's worth noting that we actually played a match before this. This, again, is a rematch. The first match was pretty lame because I basically made 3 runs and stole 3 agendas to win the game. So, yeah, obviously, that's just bad luck. Yeah, so I do know a bit about my opponent's deck here. They are running a bunch of 3-pointers and they run Government Takeover as well, which leads me to believe they are on Punitive Counter-Strike. So you will see me trying to manage my credit level here. I'm not going to run unless I'm richer than my opponent or I think I can take 1 or 2 Punitives to the face. Alright, my opponent places what seems to be a Christian Grid on Archives, which turns off my ID ability, so important to take note of that. We also know that I have Employee Strike, so I'm basically Valencia here. It costs me nothing to check my opponent's remotes, and that allows me to trash DBSs. Very important to get those off the board, because I want my opponent to flood in HQ. They think they might be safe behind whatever ice they have on HQ. They are not. I have DDoS legwork in hand, and now really is the question of, is this the right time to go? Is this the turn to career fair DDoS legwork? My answer is not yet. I need to check these remotes. Pack campaign in one of them, and Bankers Group. Okay, that's going in the bin. We do not like Bankers Group there. Last turn, career fair DDoS. Now, you usually don't show the DDoS until the turn you want to combo off, because you don't want your opponent to double ice HQ. I showed it here because I think my opponent already knew I'm on DDoS, and I believe I injected it anyway. So I rather get the DDoS down now, so that on my big turn I can get 4 runs in instead of just 3. So is this the turn? Nope. I decided that I needed some money first. Again, I'm really afraid of punitive here. As you can see from my hand, there's a particular combo I want to pull off. I want to legwork my opponent, on person the HQ ice, which opens up HQ and allows me to repeatedly run there in subsequent turns. Hopefully the ice that I on person turns out to be a tour guide. Getting rid of tour guides at this point will be huge. Okay, is this the turn? Is it time to go? I take a while to think. It is very tempting to just sit back, check the remote, drop the Earthrise so I can get constant draw, but I think this is the right time to go. I can't wait too long. My opponent already got HQ ice, making my life sort of tricky. So here's what I'm going to do. Click 1, I'm going to get a successful run on R&D with only 1 ice on it. DDoS gets me through for free. So I don't have to worry about my opponent's ice, don't have to worry about breakers. I see an IP block, that's fine. Click 2, I'm going to run HQ past the outer ice and then jack out. Can you see what I'm doing here? En passant. I remove the en passant ice, then I swoop in for the legwork. This is what en passant does. It's ice destruction for unres ice, and it combos so well with DDoS. The legwork fetches me a Hollywood renovation, an Ash, and an old Hollywood grid. Interesting. Now I'm kind of worried about the old Hollywood grid here. I think it's a bit too easy for my opponent to push an agenda through a remote if I let them have the old Hollywood grid. So I trash it, and I end my turn on 3 cards specifically, fearing the punitive, but it doesn't come out. So at this point, I'm more or less aware of what my opponent's doing. My opponent's not on kill as I initially expected. My opponent is all in on defensive upgrades, scoring big agendas. We saw the Ash and Old Hollywood in their HQ. So that gives you a very good idea of the kinds of cards you're expecting and the kind of win con you're expecting from Gagarin. He's going wide, but he's also going to go rather tall in terms of getting a good remote setup with some taxing ice, followed by an Ash and Old Hollywood grid. And presumably, playing Gagarin is just so that they can stick the economy assets that root. The root there is paying off big time. Getting my opponents free pack campaigns, free DBSs, and in this case, a free public support as well. So that's a very huge boon for my opponent. They don't really have to worry about money. I also don't really have to worry about their money. They can't res any big ice. I'm not gonna let them res ice. I have DDoS, and that's the plan. So, speaking of DDoS, I draw into it. Pretty good, except that it's not gonna be very useful here because, yeah, I don't have any legworks. But what I do have is more, and I'm gonna maul the pack campaign off the table. Great. Sorry, no, I'm not gonna maul the pack campaign. I'm gonna maul my opponent's HQ, and this should place a lot of pressure on them. They can't draw lots of cards because if they do, it'll all get mauled. So this is the counter to asset spam, and again, another big reason why I prefer playing aggro criminal in orange rather than in blue, because you have access to powerful cards like maul that disrupt asset spam, whereas in criminal you really don't have many things solutions for asset spam. I continue checking my opponent's remotes, making sure that they don't have Wampoas, no DBSs, and certainly no sneaky agendas being pushed out. We don't want any of that here. The game trundles on for a bit. There's nothing much I really need to do at this point. My opponent is barely placing any pressure on me. Not having to worry about traces that kill me is a huge advantage. No punitive, no hard-hitting news means that I can run pretty freely and maul pretty freely as well. So now we enter the setup phase. As I mentioned in the PowerPoint earlier, The setup phase is when you're on match point, and now you're just building up your rig, building up your money so that you can go in for the final push for the final agenda. Except I'm not quite on match point. I need 3 agendas to win, but I only have 1. So this is a problem. I've actually fetched fewer agendas than I wanted to. And that's mostly because I let my opponent get too many DBS triggers. I was a bit too reactive with the DBSs, only running them after my opponent got 1 tick off. But that's huge because my opponent's probably running a 6 or 7 agenda deck. Every buried agenda counts double against me because they have so few agendas in the deck. Every time they bury one, that's a lot fewer agenda points that I have access to. Big problem there. Now the funny part about my deck is that even though I mentioned that we are in the setup phase, it doesn't look like I'm setting up much at all. I still only have 3 installed cards at this point in the game. Where my setup really lies in is actually dropping my Conspiracy Breakers in the bin and setting up my hand such that I get a big combo turn. And I found exactly the cards I need to pull it off. Again, DDoS, en passant, legwork. Those are your magic cards. That's what I'm gonna do. So, what I plan to do here is to actually get enough money, and now I'm at a point, to actually contest the Archives Christian Grid. Because when I'm thinking, which ice should I en passant, it makes perfect sense to en passant the Archives ice. It works double duty, because it gives me inroads to both R&D and HQ. Makes a lot of sense, so I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna drop the DDoS here to prepare for my big turn next turn. And yeah, don't ask me why I didn't play the E-Strike from my hand. I really should have. Get rid of the get rid of the scarcity out there, because that scarcity made my DDoS cost 5 credits. That was pretty stupid of me. So, whoops, big mistake. So yeah, here I was contemplating whether to fire off the DDoS and go for it. I would ideally like to save the DDoS for when my opponent goes for the score in the remote, because with only 1 ice protecting that remote, I am directly threatening any scores in there with the DDoS. I could. So legwork is useless. My opponent has no hand. So this is really all about running R&D, running archives, en passant archives, and killing the Christian Grid, which I have barely enough money for. So I'd rather maintain some money to ensure that my opponent doesn't, get a free scoring window here. And I'll swoop in next turn. Meanwhile, old Hollywood Grid makes an appearance. Uh-oh. It's a score coming their way. Score coming my way, I should say. They go for hostile takeover. Interesting. They run hostile. Okay. So they didn't know what to do with their agenda they just drew. They rather score it instead of milling it in the bin, which makes perfect sense. Even though that bad pub is going to count against them big time, I think scoring the hostile here was correct, because getting the hostile mod into the bin is very bad for them, because it counts against them as one of the 3 agendas I need to win the game. And they know that I'll be running archives sooner or later. So again, every single turn I'm thinking, is this the combo turn? Do I fire off the DDoS here and run? Or do I save the DDoS for when they do draw an agenda and jam it into the remote? Tough to say. I have gotten a bunch of more triggers since installing more. So I think it makes perfect sense to fire off the DDoS and check my opponent's bin. But first, we run R&D to get... Oh, never mind. Government takeover, I win the game. Yeah, that's one way to win. Casually top decking the 6-point agenda. If there's one thing good about this deck, and one reason why you all should play it, it's because it unlocks a lot of achievements for you. Who needs icebreakers? We still run. We still get agendas. Icebreakers are a crutch. No, seriously. Omar, I find, is a really fun runner, and it feels so good to play pseudo-criminal once again. The amount of pressure you can place from turn 1 is amazing, and it really rewards, just aggressive running, which I think is a bit lacking in today's meta. Single accesses in particular are underrated by a lot of players, but the best players win because they get agendas early, and that's exactly what this deck tries to do. It'll destabilize the court from turn 1, forcing them to find at least 4 pieces of ice, 1 on each central plus a second piece on HQ to prevent the DDoS legwork. And even then, they are not advancing the game. They can't create an ice remote because all the ice is spent deterring the threats of Omar. In fact, Omar is actually that much better because He is an undercover criminal in disguise. People see the ID and go like, oh, he's not gonna do much. He's an old man who old for his age to run. What can he do? And then the DDoS and the legworks come in, and then he sneaks through the back door, getting your global foods and everything. And you're like, whoa, this man packs a punch. That's exactly what you want to do. Leave your opponents underestimating Omar, but then reeling after the fact. That said, this game I didn't get to truly show the power of early HQ pressure by only getting one Hollywood renovation. That wasn't that good. Mostly thanks to DBSs. However, I managed to extend the period with which I could get single accesses thanks to en passant. With en passant on HQ, remember that time where I sneakily passed the outer HQ ice to then en passant it? It forced my opponent to dedicate lots of ice on HQ to the point where it's like, okay, I guess I'm not going to run your HQ, I'm just going to en passant your archives ice later, which I would have done if I didn't just outright win with the government takeover. The problem with this deck is that while it performs very well against ice-like decks like the likes of CI and in this case Acid Spam, it probably falters to Glacier. I haven't played a game against Glacier with it yet, but I can see it being pretty bad because those are the type of decks that can assemble the required double ice centrals by early game, and that makes life really difficult because this deck doesn't really pack that much money. Still, it's a really fun deck and I urge you to give it a shot. It's a lot more fun than some other runner decks that are out there. And even though it contains degenerate cards in form of DDoS, I think the sheer aggression and not very high power level of it kind of makes up for it. We'll see. Well, thanks for watching and happy net running. Hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.